This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good morning, everyone. Ambassadors, Minister, guests, you're all very welcome to this event at the IIEA generally on the topic of enlargement, which is back on the agenda with perhaps some renewed vigor, the agenda of the European Union for the period ahead, as indicated indeed in the recent strategic agenda. We're very honoured to have with us today the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Moldova, Mihai Popșoi, and he will address us in a few moments. Before I introduce him, just the usual indications about the déroulement of the event. It is sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs under its Future-Proofing Europe program. It is not only live here, but also on the web. For those of you that would like to ask questions here, all you have to do is raise your hand and a roving mic will be brought to you. For those following the event on the internet, you use the Q&A function on Zoom to pose a question, and I hope that they will arrive here on the iPad that I have in front of me. Both the presentation by the Minister and the Q&A will be on the record. And the event will also be, you can respond to the event as well on Twitter using the handle @IIEA. Minister Popșoi is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Moldova. He has a doctorate in political studies from the University of Milan. From 2019 to 2024, he was Deputy Speaker of the Parliament and faction leader of the Action and Solidarity Party. He also served as a Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in 2022. And his extensive parliamentary work includes co-chairing the Parliamentary Committee on Moldova-EU Association and the Moldova-Poland Parliamentary Committee. His address today will cover both the preparation in Moldova for accession to the European Union, now that the talks to the formal negotiations to progress accession began at the very end of June, as well as addressing some of the nefarious effects, if I can put it that way, of Moldova's being almost on the front line in the most serious conflict in Europe since the Second World War between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine with which Moldova has a very long border. And I'm sure the Minister will want to update us on the spillover effects of that on the country and on the progress of the accession negotiations as well. So, Minister, without further ado, I'll give you the floor. I understand you'll address us for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we will go to question and answer. Minister Popșoi.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, dear friends. It is a special honor for me to be for the first time in Ireland, the wonderful, hospitable, and generous home for so many hardworking and law-abiding Moldovans. And I discover them literally every day, yesterday and today, on the street, in the hotel, who are contributing to the economy of Ireland and who are making a good name for themselves, but also for the Republic of Moldova, given their constant contribution. I'm also particularly pleased given the wonderful political relationship that we have with Ireland and the fact that I follow here within a week the President of the Republic of Moldova is a testament to how close our relations are. And this relationship is manifest in the constant support that Ireland has provided to the Republic of Moldova in the context of our country's EU accession process, but also in the aftermath of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The support of the people of Ireland, of the leadership, has been constant. And this support has allowed the Republic of Moldova to continuously be able to support Ukraine. We always say that any and every support that Ukraine receives, it's a support for the Republic of Moldova, and the other way around. Every support that we get makes us stronger and better prepared to continuously support our friends and neighbors in Ukraine. And indeed, the Republic of Moldova has welcomed by far the largest number of refugees per capita in a country of barely 2.5 million people. We welcomed through the Republic of Moldova about 1.5 million of Ukrainian refugees. We currently host about 115,000 of women and children, and we have provided full access to labor market, education, healthcare, temporary protection measures, because we know full well that Ukraine defends us as much as they defend themselves. Ukraine defends the international rule-based order. Ukraine defends with the blood of the servicemen and women and the civilians that get attacked constantly, including the most recent barbaric attack on the hospital in Kyiv, where children struggling with cancer, including before the war, kids from the Republic of Moldova would have been treated there on a regular basis. These barbaric attacks and all the others that happen daily on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, of course, the repercussions are felt very strongly in the Republic of Moldova. But despite this enormous horror that we face day to day, Moldova now is more resilient and stronger than it was 2 or 3 years ago, because we took action. We didn't just muddle through. We achieved meaningful progress in this past few years on areas that felt impossible to advance, such as energy security. It felt for the past 30 years that Moldova has this umbilical cord connection with Gazprom, which was impossible to break. Well, it turns out it is possible if you have the political will, and if you take national security and energy security seriously, then you can find solutions. And quite frankly, it is incredibly unfortunate that political leadership in Moldova, our predecessors, have kicked the can down the road for over a decade now and failed to implement in time the third energy package of the European Energy Charter to unbundle the energy supply, because we've been dependent for as long as I can remember, since Moldova's independence, on one supplier, one transit, one distributor of gas, and that's not ideal. You don't need to have a Ph.D. in security studies or economics to know a dependency on one supplier and one transit and one distributor is not a position where you want to find yourselves in. Now, we have diversified, we are buying gas on the international market, and at times, and that was evident in one of the purchases we made last year, we bought American LNG at a price that was lower than what the contract that we have with Gazprom would have offered. And we buy it in the summer on the cheap, we store it, and we use it in winter, and you would think that it's a no-brainer that we should have been addressing a long time ago. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't the case, because as many of you probably know who are more astute followers of developments in Moldova, there was a time where political leadership in Moldova not only didn't have an interest to diversify, they had an interest to maintain the dependency on Gazprom, because there are all sorts of corrupt schemes involved with energy supply, and all sorts of kickbacks and all sorts of shady schemes of profits being siphoned off to offshore companies. And that was the sad reality that we faced for a long time. Thankfully, a number of years ago, when we had a change of government in Moldova, which some of our friends remember, when we used to have 2 governments at the same time for about a week, Moldova's democracy was tested then, and Moldovan people and their aspiration for democracy, for rule of law, for human rights, for a return to the European family of nations prevailed. And now, despite the enormous suffering and despite the barbaric aggression waged by the Russian Federation against our neighbor and friend Ukraine, Moldova manages to persevere despite all odds. Despite having lost several decades. In the 90s, we missed the train when our friends and brothers in Romania started the negotiations. The 2000s, when our friends from the Western Balkans advanced. We lost all those opportunities. We had our own glimpse of hope in the early 2010s only to be destroyed by, again, the corruption and the avarice by the political leadership that destroyed that hope that so many Moldovan people had in the 2010s. It felt like Moldova was going in the right direction, only for that hope to be shattered by the billion-dollar fraud and everything that followed. And they say that people don't get second chances often. Well, countries get them even less often. Moldova now has this second chance, thanks, again, to the wisdom of the Moldovan people, to the determination of this small, young team that President Sandu put together, that our opponents back in the day didn't give much credit. And that was our luck, because they didn't take us seriously. The oligarch that was ruling the country with an iron fist, he disregarded this young team that was creating this grassroots movement for rule of law, for European integration, for combating corruption, led by a woman politician with no financial backing other than small donations from our citizens. They didn't take us seriously. They called us hipsters, backpackers, because we would carry our laptops on our backs. And that was our luck, because had the oligarch taken us seriously, he may not have allowed us to stand in elections. He did. We won in 2019. We defeated the oligarch. Then we defeated the Russian proxy that was acting as oligarch's puppet in the presidential office. We defeated him in 2020. Then we obtained the majority in parliament in 2021. And now we have another important test this year: presidential elections and EU referendum. And when I was telling my counterparts at the beginning of the year that we have an EU referendum, and that was weeks before we got the green light to start negotiations, my counterparts were asking, isn't it a bit early to have an EU referendum? And our explanation is simple. We want to show our citizens and the world the extent to which Moldovans are aware and want to indicate precisely where they want to be. Because we have been ripped apart from the European family of nations in the Second World War for no fault of our own. And ever since then, during the Soviet Union and throughout the 30 years of independence, we had this constant tug of war, geopolitical tug of war. And we need to make up our mind. And our citizens have spoken loud and clear in the last parliamentary election, presidential election. But we also want to enshrine it in our constitution, the European trajectory of the Republic of Moldova. And we are confident, though I shouldn't be too confident, because that's what I get from some of our voters, that they are sure that the referendum will pass, that they will sure that President Sandu will win. And when you have this overconfidence for voters, this sometimes doesn't end well. So we need to work hard every single day to work for every single vote, especially in the country like Moldova, where we have struggled in this never-ending identity battles, issues that the Kremlin has tried to use against the Republic of Moldova to divide us domestically, fostering and feeding these cleavages of language, of history, trying to divide us now along Moldovans who are at home and Moldovans that are in the diaspora, Moldovans who are Romanian speakers and Russian speakers, trying to divide us between Moldovans and Ukrainian refugees. But thankfully, they have not been able to achieve any meaningful progress, although they keep on trying. With the amount of money that they are funneling into the country, with the enormous avalanche of all sorts of hybrid tactics that they are trying to employ to destabilize the situation, to undermine the legitimate craving of the Moldovan people to be part of the European family of nations, together with Romania, together with the Baltic states, with Poland, with Ireland. And it's a tough battle. It's a constant struggle, because Russian propaganda would make you believe that European Union is the Middle Ages, that the impact of the accession is horrible. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, and we have had recently some clear evidence of taking some mayors from one of the most pro-Russian regions in Moldova and have them on a field trip to study visit to Poland, to some of the communities there. And they have had a coming to Jesus moment. Because it's one thing to be told on Russian propaganda that this decadent West, that the horrible economic conditions in the Baltics and elsewhere. And when you come and see it, and it turns out that the economic conditions are incomparably better, not just with those that we have in the Republic of Moldova, because that might be understandable, but a lot better than what they have in Russia, where regions outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, you would struggle to find infrastructure that you would think is basic in the 21st century, including lack of gas and electricity and plumbing. But propaganda makes wonders, because if our partners who are incredibly generous with the Republic of Moldova and have supported us throughout this many years of struggling, if 1 million euros is invested in infrastructure in Moldova and the Russians spend 10K on propaganda, more often than not, that 10K on propaganda can undo the good work of that 1 million invested in sewage, in running water, in building a road or a school. So we need to be much more proactive and much more creative in how we communicate with our citizens. And that's what we try to do now. We try to engage with every single citizen, including in some of the more pro-Russian regions, because it's not their fault that they've been left by the Moldovan political elites on the sidelines of the Moldovan political system, and they have not been helped to properly benefit from the Moldovan political debates, from the economic opportunities in the country, because they have not been helped to learn the national language. And it's only last year, for the first time, that we have provided resources from the budget to help our Russian-speaking citizens to learn Romanian so that they can truly benefit from what the country has to offer. And we have been truly surprised, and maybe we shouldn't have been, that there were twice as many volunteers who signed up for these Romanian language courses than the money that we had budgeted. But we will continue to provide support to our citizens, because it is this very feeling of alienation, this feeling of ghetto mentality that the Russians are exploiting, that they are weaponizing this perceived disenfranchisement of certain groups of citizens to the detriment of national unity and to the detriment of the strategic vision of our country to be part of the European Union. And we are making efforts, because at the end of the day, if you talk to citizens, if you inform them, if you help them internalize the incredible generosity of European Union, of our friends in the United States, of our friends in Japan, and the free world generally, as President Sandu likes to say, if you help them internalize this support, then of course in time that makes a difference. But more often than not, we are faced with situations where some folks can drive on a road that was built with Turkish taxpayer money, take their kids to a kindergarten that was rebuilt with Romanian taxpayer money, go to school that was built with European Union funds, work in a small enterprise that was launched with some American assistance, but they end up praying to Putin like the Lord and Savior, because that was what propaganda has been telling them, that Russia has helped them, when in fact the Kremlin has not given anything that Moldovans can be thankful for. In fact, everything that we have received from the Kremlin was only sorrow and despair. And the Kremlin has kept the Republic of Moldova and all of its citizens, including Russian speakers, including those in the Transnistrian region, including those in Gagauzia, hostages to this malign influence that the Kremlin has waged in our region for many, many years, trying to deny our sovereignty, trying to weaponize our neutrality status, which the Kremlin is the only ones constantly violating by virtue of maintaining troops and munitions in the Republic of Moldova, despite the clear, manifest position of successive governments in Moldova to withdraw those troops and munitions. But thankfully, our citizens are getting increasingly more aware, and we have taken action to curb Russian propaganda in Moldova. It has taken us a year of the war in domestic internal political debates. Should we shut down Russian propaganda in Moldova? Should we not? What our citizens are going to say, what our friends in Brussels and Strasbourg are going to say. And then when in December 22, I believe, the European Union shut down Russia Today, we figured if it's good for European Union, it's good for us. So we addressed that, but it will take years, if not decades, to mitigate the damage that propaganda has done to Moldovan citizens. But it's important to start, and it's important to have this constant engagement and discussion with our citizens. And that's what we're trying to do. In a public debate, in public discussions, including in this all-important referendum that we have in October. Because that's what democracies do. You engage with your citizens, you have the hard, difficult debates, and you answer all the difficult questions that citizens may have. And ultimately, you give them the democratic choice, which folks in Russia don't have. And that's the irony of some of the supporters of the so-called Russian world in Moldova still have this constant ambiguity, because on the one hand, it's the propaganda, and on the other hand, it's the reality of the front line in Ukraine, the destruction of civilian lives and the destruction of cultural heritage and the killing and maiming of children and civilians on a daily basis. So more and more people realize that the Russian world is only bringing destruction and suffering. And hopefully more and more Moldovans will become aware of that. But we can only thank the international community for the support to the Ukrainian people and to the Republic of Moldova to be able to withstand this avalanche, this malign influence that we face on a daily basis. And we are confident that with this support and with the support of our people, we will be able to persevere, we'll be able to prevail, and we'll be able ultimately to return to the European family of nations and to be able to live in the community of prosperous, peaceful, loving countries that we are as well. And we can only thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the generous support of Ireland to the Republic of Moldova. And we can tell you that you can continue to rely on us as a credible partner in the region, as a country that wants to contribute to security and not be just a consumer of security, and to be a reliable member of the European family of nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that terrific introduction to the situation, and your resilience is what comes through, and your fight against not only traditional forms of aggression, if I can put it that way, but the hybrid types of threat that you face. Particularly, you have emphasized the information and disinformation and fraudulent or money-related interferences. You also ended by praising the relations between our two countries. I'm delighted that this is your first visit to Dublin, and I should have recognized when we came in the two ambassadors, Ambassador Larissa Michelet, working here in Dublin for Moldova, and Brendan Ward, a former colleague of mine in Romania, but non-resident ambassador to Chisinau. Perhaps I could ask the first question. You spoke about the upcoming referendum and election combined. I think it's in October. And your sense of the mood of people in Moldova. What is known of the mood of the population of Transnistria? I mean, presume they will not be voting in this referendum. But what is known about the feelings of people there, particularly given the very interesting point you made about bringing the mayors to visit Poland and seeing the reality of life within the European Union? Tiraspol is not that far from Chisinau. Is there any spillover effect, to put it that way, of the the positive experiences of life in Moldova into the Transnistrian area?
Certainly there are, and the Transnistrian region, just in sheer numbers, in the last parliamentary election, the Transnistrian residents, citizens of the Republic of Moldova who reside in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, they are allowed to vote, and they will be voting in the referendum and in the presidential election. In the past parliamentary election, the party that I have the honor of representing got 14% among the citizens, Moldovan citizens in that region. And in the autonomous region of Gagauzia, we only got 4%. And in the autonomous region of Gagauzia, it's a constitutionally controlled territory of Moldova, and we could campaign there. In the Transnistrian region, we couldn't step foot, and we got more than 3 times the number of votes. So that tells you the mood, at least in these numbers. But another metric that is even more important, and it's just very fresh from this past week, because the previous number was about 70%. Now it's 80%. That is the percentage of exports of the Transnistrian region to the European Union. 80% of everything that is produced in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova is exported to the European Union. The rest of the Republic of Moldova is somewhat behind the Transnistrian region, because we are exporting about 70%, and the Transnistrian region of Moldova, 80%. So that tells you the significant anchoring of the region in the European Union. And that's only understandable given the geopolitical reality that we face. And in fact, the region and the so-called leadership there, they were very keen to be anchored onto the European Union, because at the end of the day, the business elite there, like business people everywhere, they know where it's better for them. They know that where you have a market where, first of all, the purchasing power is a lot larger, but also you have business with no political strings attached. Market access is not being used as a political tool and as a blackmail, as has been in the case of the Russian market access for the Republic of Moldova. And not to mention the horror of the Russian world in full display in Ukraine. Even the more hardcore pro-Russian folks in the Transnistrian region, when they look at what's happening just a couple hundred miles away from their community, you'll be hard-pressed not to reevaluate the reality. So on the one hand is the horror that Russia is waging on a daily basis in Ukraine. And on the other hand, you have the 80% exports in the European Union. You have now the opportunity of starting negotiations when it comes to the single market access. And in 2014, when we signed the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade area, folks on the left bank in the Transnistrian region were very eager to have their interests represented in the Moldovan agreement with the European Union. And that was the case. And we expect now that there will be even a stronger impetus for them to make sure that their interests are represented in light of this incredible anchoring. So opportunities are out there, and we are firmly convinced that the only solution to the Transnistrian issue is a peaceful solution. And in light of the enormous economic opportunities that arise from EU accession, which we are very open to sharing with all of our citizens, because unlike the Kremlin, who doesn't care for the Russians, Russian speakers, or even Russian citizens, in Ukraine, in Moldova, we care for our citizens. Do they speak Romanian? Do they speak Russian? We care, and we want them to benefit from every opportunity that we can get. And in light of the energy diversification, there is less dependence. So the opportunities and the economic incentives are becoming more robust, and we will not shy away from using those economic incentives for a peaceful reintegration.
Very interesting. Functional integration. Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Oliver Grogan.
Thank you indeed, Minister. Is it working? Thank you, Minister. Your address, I think, was very enlightening. And I was very interested to hear your references to Transnistria. And indeed, one should be very encouraged by I think, the underlying sense of pragmatism, which seems to be there, and a growing sense. But is it true that maybe eyebrows were raised in the West when the authorities in Transnistria in February called for the protection of Russia. Now, I know that it's noted that afterwards this declaration was heavily qualified, but what is your sense behind this declaration? Is it there? Are they trying to play both sides off at the same time? How do you interpret it? Thank you.
Well, there was a lot of fuss about that event, and nothing really came out of it. Unfortunately, our friends in international media have made us a bit of a disservice because they portrayed it as carrying a lot more risks than it actually did. And our intelligence and Ukrainian intelligence and the intelligence of our partners were telling us that nothing is going to come out of this event, and nothing did. But the damage was done. The perception was that there was something to it. It ended up with a declaration of that gathering asking for Russian support, only to be edited. They themselves edited in an hour, saying that they asked for Russian diplomatic support. Because even they realized that they didn't want to have any ambiguity about what kind of support they're asking. So we have made sure that the situation in the Transnistrian region remains stable, and the folks on the ground also have an interest in the situation remaining stable. No rational person wants to see his or her community to be ravaged by instability. And there were some attempts by the Kremlin to push folks in the Transnistrian region for some escalatory measures. There was this, on the Russian so-called election day, there was an explosion of a helicopter in the Transnistrian region that was long decommissioned. And to make a nice explosion, they had to add kerosene to the helicopter. They had to put the rotor back on because it was staying rotting there in the field. They had to put the rotor on and then hit it with a drone and make a nice explosion. The camera was perfectly positioned, very good quality. They should get an Oscar for cinematography. But other than that, there weren't any other major attempts at escalation. And we have constant talks with the folks on the left back in the Transnistrian region because nobody has an interest in causing any measure that would hurt our citizens. Whether they live in Tiraspol, in Bender, in Chisinau, in Belz or Comrade, we want to make sure that our citizens can continue to benefit from peace, although peace is a strong word when you have a war zone to the extent to which Europe hasn't seen since the Second World War, and it's only a couple hundred miles away. But at least in the Republic of Moldova, we can assure our citizens that we have absolutely no interest in any escalation, and the folks in the Transnistrian region know that.
Ambassador.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for chairing. Before this meeting, we had a short discussion on Moldova's preparations to join the European Union. It's a very, very ambitious plan, but I would appreciate if you perhaps can expand a bit more and tell us what stages and how do you see things developing. If you have some form of time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's very, very ambitious, maybe just ambitious, or perhaps even realistic. Given Moldova being able to benefit from the European acquis being available in our national language, in Romanian, that makes it a lot easier than having to translate the whole body of European law into another language. The fact that about half of Moldovan citizens, including myself, are full-fledged European citizens by virtue of having a Romanian passport, that also helps. We just joke sometimes that we need to legalize the real estate back home because the people are already with their documents in order, full-fledged European citizens. The fact that the Republic of Moldova is relatively small, we don't have any major issue if you slightly put aside the Transnistrian conflict, which is difficult to put aside. But we are working hard now to clarify our capacity gaps so that we can address them in time and be able to move full speed ahead with the negotiation process. And again, thanks to the enormous support that we get from our partners in the European Union, including Ireland, including Malta, including Hungary, we get offers of expertise to help us advance better and faster on the negotiation process. And we will be reaching out to our partners to benefit from this expertise, short-term, long-term experts to help us negotiate faster and better our accession. And with that in line, that's the argument that it's not perhaps very ambitious, but it's just about realistic in light of the very good political relations that we have. And we are very happy to see now the new leadership in European institutions shaping up. We have a trusted partnership with Ursula von der Leyen, with Roberta Metsola, with Kaja Kallas, with Prime Minister Costa. We have very good partnership with political parties in European Parliament. When Moldova was on the agenda and any resolution was on the floor, it always passed with overwhelming support. So in light of this quasi-consensus in European Union, when it comes to Moldova, we don't see any major issue. And I must say that also in light of the Transnistrian discussion, we are thankful to our partners in Brussels and in member states that they don't make it a condition, the settlement of the conflict to the EU accession, although we understand that that needs to go hand in hand. The fact that our friends in Brussels are saying that the Cyprus precedent is there, although again, we don't count on the Cyprus precedent, but to not make it a condition deprives the Kremlin of leverage when it comes to our accession process. We know that we need to work on the settlement, and we do, in light of the economic opportunities that arise. But the sheer fact that these are two separate tracks allows us more leeway and doesn't give de facto the Kremlin a veto power on our accession process. So the capacities are being addressed. The political support is there. It's only a matter of us back home doing the heavy lifting, and we have the commitment to do that, because ultimately we're not doing that for the sake of European accession alone. Justice reform is perhaps even more important for the sake of Moldova's economic development. I will not be able to convince not just a Moldovan here in Dublin to bring his or her hard-earned money to Moldova and invest. I would struggle to convince a Moldovan at home to invest their money back home if I cannot guarantee them proper, independent, professional judiciary. If I can guarantee them in court, they are going to win if they are right, and not if the other part pays more. So we understand that justice reform is a cornerstone of Moldova's future, regardless of European accession. If it helps us to join the European Union, beautiful. But ultimately, it's the cornerstone of Moldova's development. So we are fully aware of that. And that's, if you will, the political DNA of the party that I have the honor of representing, and President Sandu's political agenda is justice reform and European integration. And they're intertwined.
That's a very interesting point, because I mean, we joined the European Union 50 years ago. The acquis was a very different and more compact body of legislation.
It's more fluffy now.
It's much wider, and there are different emphases now within it, including, which you have just touched upon, the whole rule of law chapter and its centrality to the process. But tremendous challenge for Ireland at the time in the 70s was the adjustment in the economy. How could you say a little bit about the challenges that you see in that area for Moldova to, I suppose, I'm not sure about the structure of your economy, but probably to remove the state more from the economy, I imagine, and also to standardize, of course, to European standard?
Well, first of all, I must commend the vision and the hard work of the people of Ireland and the leadership, because in 50 years, Ireland cannot be compared to what it was 50 years ago. The economic transformation, and that's true for Ireland, it's true for Poland, it's true for Romania, and we count on it being true soon enough for Moldova as well. Because that's a fact, that's not up for debate whether the European Union helped Ireland, or it helps Romania, or it helps the countries in the Baltics and elsewhere, unlike what the Russian propaganda would make you believe. In the Republic of Moldova nowadays, we are already a small open economy. We want to be a somewhat bigger open economy, but we are very open. The challenges stemming from European accessions are lower, given that we have already for a decade now the deep and comprehensive free trade area, and most of our exports already go to the European Union, and we've been working for over a decade to adjust our technical standards to those of the European Union. We still have a long way to go. There is no way to sugarcoat it. There is a lot of work to be done, but it's in a way nothing new. We just need to carry on, perhaps intensify. Of course, we might need some provisions to see in some areas. Perhaps it would need to take a bit longer time for adjustment. In some areas, would be better prepared to go in faster. But the support of the European Union has been there. The lifting of quotas last year, for instance, in some of the fruits and vegetables from Moldova, have made Moldova a powerhouse when it comes to plums exports. We are a leader in Europe in plums. We are a big exporter in cherries. And call me biased, but those are the best cherries and plums you can have. Not to mention the wine in Moldova. And speaking of state-owned enterprises, they are fewer, and we are determined to have a smaller state presence of the state in the economy. And we would be very eager to see more investors from Ireland, from any other countries in Europe and in the Euro-Atlantic community to participate in these efforts that we want to streamline and to modernize and to make the economy more efficient. But again, thanks to the constant support of the European Union, including the support to our producers to create more added value, so that we don't export the raw material, the fruits, but process them and
add value.
And have a higher added value, invest more in technology sector. We have a vibrant ITC sector now, and we are trying to continuously diversify, because the overwhelming perception back home is that Moldova is an agricultural country. Well, if you look at the numbers of the economic statistics, that's not exactly the case, because the IT sector is contributing enormously, the services sector, the banking sector, the pharmaceuticals. But we need to have more added value in the agricultural sector so that we can benefit from, for instance, the ecological products niche in the European Union, that we could be very competitive. Because in some areas, because of our economic challenges, we didn't have a lot of money to use on pesticides. So we have a lot better agricultural products. And we try to find that niche that we can occupy. And one of the silver linings in the Russian embargo on Moldovan wines that started in the mid-2000s, long time ago, was that our wine sector has performed and transformed since then, to the point that we are now producing less wine, slightly less wine than we used to produce 15 years ago. But we as a budget and the wine sector earns a lot more than before, because the quality increased, the price is better, and we have a lot of boutique wineries that popped up with restaurants, with hotels, and this whole hospitality industry has been transformed. And you can ask the Prime Minister of Ireland, who visited Moldova last year for the European Political Community Summit, which was hosted by a very nice winery.
The famous cellars.
The famous cellars. So that was a blessing in disguise. The Russian embargo on Moldovan agricultural produce and wine actually helped our wine industry transform. It wasn't pleasant, but at the end of the day, it was the external shock that we needed. And I'm not quite ready to thank the Russians for the energy crisis, but the fact that we got pushed with our backs against the wall put us in a position to do the difficult job of diversification, which, as I mentioned, should have been done a long time ago. But, you know, as the saying goes, better late than never.
And quality rather than quantity. So that will be
definitely. And quality over speed. That's another one that our friends in Brussels are telling us when it comes to reforms, and we totally agree.
I have one question from a participant on the web. Tom Murphy asks, will Moldova remove neutrality from its constitution? And if so, when?
That's a very tough discussion when it comes to the neutrality clause. On the one hand, it is clear that in the constitution, it was introduced in the early 90s as a way of hoping to shape the Russians into taking their troops and munitions from Moldova. Needless to say, it didn't work out. And ever since, the Russians have been the biggest promoters of Moldova's neutrality status, while being the only ones who've been violating it for the past 30 years, if that makes any sense. At the same time, Moldovans have grown accustomed to this very soothing idea of neutrality. You don't attack anybody, nobody attacks you, you don't have to spend on defense. Whereas at the same time, you don't have to have a Ph.D. in history to know that neutrality clause never stopped an aggressor. And Ukraine was de facto neutral, was a non-military bloc country, didn't stop the Russians, didn't stop Hitler or Benelux countries, and the plan to invade Switzerland was there. So the fact that the country is neutral and aggressor, when it gets to the border and it says on the border post there, neutral country, never works. So we need to have these discussions with our citizens. Again, in a democratic environment, you need to take your time to convince citizens, to have the public debate about pros and cons, and to have a difficult discussion about ways of ensuring national security of the country. And we should have this discussion. We're trying to have this discussion. And at the end of the day, Moldovans may be persuaded in the future that neutrality is not a guarantee of security and some other opportunities must be explored. And it may as well be that in an aftermath of this robust debate, Moldovans will continue to believe that neutrality has value and it needs to stay. It's a matter for Moldovan citizens to decide, but we need to have this public discussion in light of the security situation in our region. You would have to be blind not to see the risks. But again, in light of the constant Russian propaganda for 30 years, this idea was instilled in many Moldovan citizens that neutrality is a guarantee of security. And it will take time for Moldovan citizens to have the realization that citizens of Finland and Sweden have gotten a bit quicker than others. And again, I can understand Switzerland with this geography, maybe Austria, but in the case of Moldova, with our geography, it's a bit trickier, diplomatically speaking.
Understood. Question here, yes.
Very much. Mulțumesc, domnule Popșoi, pentru prezentare. My name is Claudia Badulescu. I'm Romanian, but very interested in Moldova, and I do research on Moldova. I would have 3 quick, short questions, if possible, questions. One would be on, well, you mentioned Moldova's neutrality, but also you mentioned in your presentation that Moldova doesn't want to be a consumer of, help to ensure its security, but wants to contribute to that as well. So I wonder if you take any measures to improve Moldova's military, preparation in case of spillover of the war into Moldova. Another one would concern Moldova's reforms, more specifically to align with European standards and more specifically with regards to public administration reform, because I'd say it's still quite antiquated given the communist legacies, but also in terms of fighting corruption. And last, if the referendum goes, passes, and Moldovans vote to join the EU, including in Transnistria, do you think Russia would allow that and would say, okay, go for it? Thank you.
Well, let's start from your last question. Moldova is a sovereign country, no matter what the Kremlin believes. And it's the sovereign right of Moldovan citizens to decide their future. The Russians may not like it, but the Kremlin will have to live with it. So the stronger the message that Moldovans will send in this referendum, hopefully, the clearer it will be, including for the Kremlin, where Moldovans want to see their future. we don't have any illusions about how Moscow would react. They'll probably continue with the same efforts of trying to undermine us, but it's up to us to build our resilience to be able to better withstand those efforts. And in fact, we are always emphasizing this, that it's in the interest of all of our friends and partners for us to be more resilient, to be able to defeat these hybrid tactics that the Russians are imposing in Moldova, so that they are not successful and they are not being replicated and taken on the road to some of our other partners in the West. When it comes to public administration reform and combating corruption, that is a priority. We know that we need to modernize our public administration to be more competitive economically and to be more competitive within the European Union. But again, in light of the economic challenges, post-pandemic situation, high inflation with energy cost, aftermath of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, there is only so much that you have only so much bandwidth when it comes to reforms, and justice reform, the biggest undertaking that we have. So we'll have to take it steady. We'll have to prepare our citizens. And we have now the voluntary amalgamation of communities, a reform that was very successful in Ukraine, and we're trying to learn from that experience. We provide incentives for small communities to merge, to be more competitive, and we'll continue to do that. When it comes to combating corruption, we've improved 40 positions in the Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International. We were 110th, something like that. Now we're 70 something in the world. Not a statistic that I'm particularly proud of, but the improvement is significant, and we'll continue to work on improving the situation. When it comes to defense spending, we've almost doubled it. We have committed ourselves under the new national security strategy to reach 1% of GDP. Traditionally, it was about 0.3, 0.4. And we know that we need to take our defense more seriously. When it comes to contributing to security in the region, for the past 10 years, we've contributed to the KFOR mission in Kosovo. We have just started our participation in the CSDP missions in Bosnia and in Somalia. We have participated in the UNIFIL mission in Lebanon, and we want to be more present because we want to contribute, and we want to make sure that our partners appreciate this support that we provide, and we'll continue to have our servicemen and women participate in missions because that helps with the interoperability with our armed forces, but we also need to invest more. And it doesn't help when your defense spending, even that one, the doubled one, is lower than the 4 defenders of Real Madrid. So we need to work hard to make sure that we take our defense spending a lot more seriously, because independence and sovereignty costs, and especially in such a troubled environment that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. One more question here from the front.
Thanks. Well, as convener of the Ireland-Moldova Interparliamentary Friendship Group, I'd just like to welcome you for the first time to Ireland. And I made my own first trip to Moldova on the 9th of May to join other conveners of friendship groups across the EU in support on Europe Day of your accession process. And within 3 weeks, I was back for a second trip with the Count Corla. So I've managed to visit quite a bit of Moldova twice within 3 weeks, and it's maybe we'll see you back here in 3 weeks. But certainly, we now know that Moldova has 10 flights a week from Dublin to Chisinau. So I think it is quite an important route, and we have so many of your citizens here. And in the context, I suppose I take your point, and the point I wanted to make was the stronger the message that comes, the better, in terms of 51% is a win, but 60, 70, 80, 90% would be better. And just to pay tribute to your ambassador and the diplomatic team in Ireland who arrived here in 2019, 2020, with no building and with no residence and with no nothing, and really hit the ground running and have made a great impact here in terms of making connections with the Parliament and with the people and with your own citizens. But you have a big diaspora. The diaspora here and the diaspora in many other countries can see the benefits of EU membership more obviously than people who are at home who can't yet see it. Maybe they see it if they go to Romania, they see it in other countries, but they're here all the time. They see the benefits. We've spoken about the benefits to Ireland. I suppose, what can you do, or what can we do as parliamentarians here or as Irish people here to harness the diaspora here and in other countries to make sure that they get out to vote in big numbers and send a message back, and also go back, because many of them have residences back in Moldova and friends and family back in Moldova, to convince them, no, this is really, the EU is not perfect. And we said this at our trip into Moldova. It's not perfect, but it's the only show in town. And it's really the only, you know, we will all have our own little quibbles with part of the organization or various bits of legislation, but it's been enormously beneficial to, I would say, every country that joined, but particularly Ireland. And whatever we can do to help you and whatever you can do to harness your diaspora, I would encourage. Thanks.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for your personal commitment when it comes to our bilateral relations and parliamentary diplomacy. I'm a big believer in parliamentary diplomacy, having led those efforts in Parliament for 5 years. And you said you've been twice to Moldova. Don't stop. You're welcome to continue on that. There isn't a number that is too high when it comes to the visits to the Republic of Moldova. We have a lot more wine cellars other than those that you've already visited. You have a head start compared to perhaps some other friends in the audience, so you're all invited. The Republic of Moldova is famously our proverbial hospitality is well known, and we look forward to host more and more of our friends, because that's not only a show of political support, but that also helps economically. The more wine you drink, the better. The relationship that we have with Ireland is quite remarkable. The fact that we have so many hardworking Moldovans here that are also supporting families back home, it's a win-win. Of course, we count on them at a certain stage to come and invest in Moldova and to help Moldova advance on its European path. But their participation in political processes back home is truly remarkable. I remember I gave you some of the statistics of some of the regions that voted in the previous election. Well, the diaspora voted about 85% in support of the party that have the honor of representing and in support of President Sandu. So the diaspora is overwhelmingly pro-European, about 90% in certain regions and countries. So the fact that we have about 10–15% of our citizens abroad, their contribution to the economic and the political development back home is difficult to underestimate. And we count on all of our citizens to be continuously active in politics back home in Moldova, just like they are in the economic activities here. And we'll continue to work to advance their interest, be it with the conversion of driving licenses here in Ireland and in other parts. We just finalize the discussions with our friends in France, be it on social welfare agreements, be it on other important agreements on protection of investments and cooperation in other fields. We try to make sure that we support our citizens, even those that are abroad, because they have such an important contribution to the economic situation through remittances, through investments, but also to the political situation back home. Because ultimately, they are, all of them, are our unofficial ambassadors, both abroad, but also when they come home and they share with the folks at home the experience that they have gathered in the European Union. And when I talk to a voter, inevitably, I will be perceived as biased. You know, you're a politician, you have an agenda. When a fellow family member who has lived and worked in Dublin, in Manchester, in Hamburg, comes and tells his or her fellow family members or friends and neighbors their experience, then it resonates a lot closer and it has a bigger impact. So we count on our citizens to continuously being there for the country and for themselves, because the better and the more developed the country is economically, politically, the better ultimately it will be for them, for their families back home. So thank you for all your support, and you're welcome back at your earliest convenience.
Thank you, Minister Popșoi. Thank you very, very much for being such a wonderful and an informative guest from. You're a very far away country from Ireland in terms of geography. I think as far east as you can go from our westerly situation. But I think from everything that is said here today, you're a lot closer than that, politically, economically, indeed, and in terms of the very positive effect that the diaspora effect has too. I'm genuinely inspired by the confidence you have shown and your mastery of the task that lies ahead of you, which is enormous. And I've looked over the accession framework that you have to now work your way through. But I think with the spirit that you've shown today and the assistance also that you are getting both from the Union and from its member states, you certainly deserve to succeed, as you said yourself and underlined, as a sovereign country. And we're not unaware that we too in the European Union have a great deal of preparation to do as well for this complicated process of enlargement that is now looming for the Union. But thank you very much, and every success in the work that you are leading and steering in relation to the accession process. Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.